the father who tried to kill his son, but the son survived and brought him to justice. A story that will leave you speechless. Roberto Rivera was a man that the whole neighborhood respected. He greeted the neighbors, helped the elderly, and always had a smile at the block gatherings. Nobody knew what was happening inside his home. Nobody imagined that this same man, once he closed the door, became someone completely different. His son, Alejandro, knew. He had lived it since he was a child. Alejandro was 22 years old. He worked at an electronics store during the day and studied at night. He was the older brother of Diego, 16 years old, and Sofia, 13. After their mom died of cancer 5 years ago, Alejandro became the silent protector of his siblings. He endured the screaming, the beatings, and the humiliations from his father so that Diego and Sofia would not receive them. But that Thursday night, Alejandro had made a very important decision. When he arrived home after work, his father Roberto was sitting on the couch with the television off and his arms crossed. That image froze Alejandro's blood, because he knew very well what it meant. Roberto only sat like that when he was waiting for a fight. "You're late," said Roberto without looking at him. "The shift ran long, Dad. I sent you a message." Roberto stood up slowly and walked toward him. "Dad, I want to tell you something," said Alejandro, and he took a deep breath. "I found a room to rent with 2 co-workers. I'm moving out next week." For a few seconds nothing happened. Roberto stared at him without saying a word. And that silence was worse than any scream. "You are going to leave me?" said Roberto in a very low voice. "After everything I have done for you. I gave you food, a roof, clothes. And now you turn your back on me." "Dad, I am not turning my back on you. I just want to live my life. In this house we do what I say." Roberto pushed him so hard that Alejandro hit the wall with his back. The pictures in the living room fell to the floor. Alejandro tried to calm him down, put his hands forward and told him to relax. But Roberto was not listening to anything anymore. He went straight to the kitchen, opened the cutlery drawer, and pulled out a large knife. Alejandro felt like time stopped. He ran toward the front door, but Roberto was faster. He blocked his way and slashed the knife at his arm. The blade opened a long wound on his right arm. Alejandro screamed in pain, but he did not fall. With all the strength he had left, he pushed his father, grabbed the keys that were on the hallway table, opened the door and ran down the stairs. He came out onto the street with no jacket, his arm bleeding, in the middle of the night. He ran several blocks without stopping until he reached a gas station. He leaned against the wall and looked at his arm. The blood was soaking through his shirt. A man who was filling up his car saw him and came over, frightened. "Hey, are you okay? What happened to you?" Alejandro did not respond. He took out his phone and dialed 911. 911, what is your emergency? "I need an ambulance. I was attacked with a knife. And I also need police because I want to file a report." "Do you know who attacked you?" Alejandro closed his eyes for a moment. "Yes. It was my father." The ambulance arrived in 10 minutes. The paramedics cleaned and bandaged the wound on his arm. They told him he needed stitches and that they had to take him to the hospital. With them also came Detective Morales, a police officer around 40 years old with a serious face but a kind manner. At the hospital, while they were stitching his wound, Morales sat beside him and asked him to tell him everything. And Alejandro spoke. Not only about that night, but about everything he had kept silent for 5 years. The beatings that came without reason. The times he arrived at the emergency room with broken ribs and said he had fallen. The screaming that Diego and Sofia heard from their bedrooms. All of that which Alejandro had kept to himself because he was afraid that nobody would believe him. Morales listened to him without interrupting him even once. When Alejandro finished, the detective closed his notebook and told him something very simple. "What you are doing right now takes a lot of courage to do. Not everyone can." That same night, Roberto Rivera was arrested in his apartment. He was sitting watching television as if nothing had happened. Diego and Sofia were taken to their aunt's house until everything was resolved. The days that followed were very difficult for Alejandro, but in a different way. Some neighbors said Roberto was incapable of something like that. A cousin of Roberto called him several times asking him to drop the charges, to think about the family, that these things get worked out between them. Even an uncle who had never called him in his life suddenly appeared telling him he had to forgive his father. Alejandro listened to everyone with respect. And he did not drop the charges. The trial lasted 6 weeks. The prosecution presented photos of the wounds, the hospital records from previous years, and the testimonies of people who had seen things inside that home. But the most important moment of the entire trial was when Sofia, 13 years old, sat in front of the judge. Nobody expected a girl her age to speak with such clarity. "My dad has been hitting Alejandro for as long as I can remember," said Sofia with a steady voice. "We saw it and we were scared. Alex never said anything because he wanted to protect us. But I know what I saw. In that courtroom you could not even hear anyone breathing." At the end of the trial, the judge declared Roberto Rivera guilty of assault with a weapon, serious bodily harm, and family abuse. The sentence was 8 years in prison. When the judge announced the sentence, Alejandro was sitting between Diego and Sofia. Sofia took her older brother's hand and squeezed it tight. Alejandro looked at her and saw that her eyes were full of tears, but she was not crying. "Are you okay?" he asked her quietly. Sofia smiled. "Now I am," she said. That afternoon the 3 siblings went out to eat together at their favorite restaurant. They ordered whatever they wanted. They talked, they laughed, and they did not look at the clock even once. When they walked out onto the street, the Los Angeles sun was shining bright and people were passing by on all sides living their normal lives. Alejandro walked slowly between his siblings and felt something he had not felt in many years: peace. Moral of the story: staying silent about abuse does not fix anything. It only gives more power to the person who is hurting you. Asking for justice is not betraying your family. It is the only way to truly protect the ones you love.